I was 67 years old when the doctor said those words. I don't remember exactly what he said, because my brain simply shut down. I know he moved his lips. I know there were graphs on a cold, bluish screen behind him. I know his hands gestured, trying to appear empathetic. But all I heard was a deep buzzing, as if I were underwater. Cancer. Aggressive, guarded prognosis. Those 3 words cut through the air like broken glass. I was alone in that room, truly alone. My children had grown up, built their lives in distant cities, with their own families and schedules too full to include a mother who always said everything was fine. My husband had died 3 years earlier, taking with him the only witness to who I truly was. And there, sitting in that faux leather chair that creaked with every movement, I realized something that hit me harder than the diagnosis. If I died tomorrow, no one would truly miss me. It wasn't self-pity. It was a cold, mathematical realization. I had spent decades taking care of everyone, being the perfect mother, the devoted wife, the reliable employee. But at some point, amidst all these versions of myself, the real person had disappeared. And now, death was knocking on the door of someone who didn't even exist anymore. The doctor's office smelled of hospital detergent and fear, that smell that clings to your throat and that you know you'll never forget. The doctor kept talking about protocols, chemotherapy, possibilities. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. I was remembering all the dreams I had shelved, the desire to write, which died when someone said writers didn't pay the bills, the passion for dance, which was traded for double work shifts, the trips that remained in old magazines on the coffee table. Every no, I said to myself now, echoed like an anticipated death sentence. I wasn't dying of cancer. I was dying of never having lived, and this realization struck me with a brutal clarity that made everything in the office clearer, more real, more painfully present. The stains on the ceiling, the ticking of the clock, the creaking of the chair, everything seemed to scream, "You wasted time." But something strange began to happen inside me. Anger. Not against the cancer, not against God or fate. I was angry at myself for being so cowardly, so small, so invisible. And that anger, I would later discover, would fuel everything that was to come. I left that doctor's office without crying. People probably expected tears, despair, maybe a frantic call to my children. But I did something different. I went home, sat on the sofa where my husband used to read the newspaper, and stared out the window until the sun completely set. I didn't call anyone. I didn't search anything on the internet. I just stayed there, feeling the weight of 67 years of half-lived existence. When darkness filled the room, I got up and turned on just a small light in the kitchen. I took an old notebook from a drawer, the kind of notebook you buy with good intentions and never use. And I started writing, not about the cancer, about everything I still wanted to do, everything I was afraid to do. Everything they told me was impossible, too late, ridiculous for someone my age. The list grew, and my hand trembled, not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in so long, I almost didn't recognize it. Excitement. I was planning a life for the first time in decades, and that should seem absurd, considering there might not be a life left to plan. But at that moment, sitting in the dim light of my kitchen, I understood something that would change everything. If I was going to die, I wanted to die alive. What would you do if you discovered you'd never truly lived? Leave your answer in the comments below. Chemotherapy began 3 weeks later. They explained the process to me as if they were reading assembly instructions for a piece of furniture. First this, then that. Possible side effects include everything bad you can imagine. I listened to it all with a calmness that surprised even myself. Maybe it was shock, or maybe I simply wasn't afraid of anything anymore. When you've already lost your entire life without realizing it, what more can be taken from you? The first session was in a large room, full of reclining chairs where other people silently received their healing poisons, each in their own particular world of pain. I looked around and saw tired faces, some too young to be there, others too old to fight so hard. There was a woman in the chair next to mine. She must have been in her 50s, with short hair that had probably fallen out and grown back a few times. But what caught my attention wasn't that. It was the sparkle in her eyes. It seemed absurd, but she was radiant, as if she were in a spa and not in a chemotherapy room. She saw me looking and smiled. Not that polite smile of someone trying to be friendly. It was a real smile, the kind you feel comes from somewhere genuine deep inside. I don't usually strike up conversations with strangers. I've spent my whole life being polite, but distant, the kind of person who answers with monosyllables and retreats into their own world. But that day, with the needle entering my arm and the cold liquid beginning to invade my veins, something made me ask, "How do you make this seem so easy?" She laughed, a soft sound that didn't fit the place where we were. Easy? It's not easy, but I've learned that I have two choices: to die before I die, or to live while I still can. And then she started telling me things that sounded crazy to me at that moment. That she meditated every morning before sunrise, that she had completely changed her diet, studying every substance she put into her body as if it were an engineering project, that she practiced yoga even when she could barely get out of bed, that she had notebooks full of notes on plants, supplements, protocols that she herself researched and tested. Not in place of chemo, she made sure to clarify, but alongside it, as if partnering with medicine, instead of simply passively surrendering to the process. I listened to her with a mixture of skepticism and fascination. I had been raised to trust only doctors with diplomas on the walls, established protocols, things that could be proven in sterile laboratories. Everything she said sounded dangerously close to the things desperate people do when they lose hope. But there was something about her, in the way she spoke, in the clarity of her gaze, in the energy she radiated even while sitting there receiving chemotherapy, that made me feel something I didn't expect: curiosity. For the first time in decades, I wanted to learn something new. Not because someone told me to, not because it was on my to-do list, but because something inside me woke up and said, "Pay attention." She gave me her phone number before leaving. "If you want to talk more, call me. I've learned that nobody should do this alone." I took the paper and put it in my bag, still unsure if I would actually use it. But while I waited for my own session to end, with that metallic taste rising in my throat and the exhaustion beginning to weigh on my bones, I kept thinking about her, about the impossible sparkle in her eyes, in the peace she carried amidst the chaos. That night, at home, I took the crumpled piece of paper from my bag and stared at it for almost an hour. Calling meant admitting that I needed help, that I didn't know everything, that maybe there was a different path than the one I'd always been taught. And something about that scribbled number seemed to hold a promise I could barely name. I called her 5 days later. I don't know exactly what made me pick up the phone that particular morning. Maybe it was the fact that I woke up at 4 in the morning with such strong nausea that I spent an hour hugging the toilet. Or maybe it was because I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back at me, with deep, dark circles under her eyes and ashen skin. She answered on the second ring, as if she had been expecting it. We arranged to meet at a small cafe, one of those that serve strange teas with names I'd never heard of. When I arrived, she was already there, with 2 notebooks open on the table and a steaming cup in her hands. She hugged me as if we were old friends, and that completely disarmed me. We sat down and she started talking, but not in the way I expected. She didn't try to sell me anything. She didn't make miraculous promises. Instead, she asked me questions. Questions that no one had ever asked before. What did I feel when I woke up? What did I eat? How did I sleep? When was the last time I was truly silent? With each answer I gave, she would jot something down in her notebooks, sometimes underlining, sometimes drawing connections between words. She seemed like a detective putting together an invisible puzzle. Then she said something that echoed in my head for days. "Your body is fighting a war, but you're giving ammunition to the enemy." I frowned. She explained that everything I put inside, every thought I entertained, every hour of sleep I lost, were choices, and accumulated choices created realities. She showed me research, studies she had printed out and highlighted with a pink marker. She talked about inflammation, about how chronic stress shuts down the immune system, about foods that act as medicine and others that act as silent poison. I listened, alternating between fascination and resistance. Part of me wanted to believe. Another part, the old and tired part, whispered that this was talk for privileged people, that I didn't have the time or energy for this kind of thing. But then she told me her own story, how she had been given a terminal diagnosis 3 years earlier, how the doctors gave her 6 months, how she decided that if she was going to die, She was going to die doing everything differently from what she had done her whole life. And here I was, 3 years later, alive and with clear test results. I left that cafe with a heavy backpack full of information and a strange feeling in my chest. Hope mixed with fear. Hope that maybe there was another way. Fear that it was too late, that my body was already too tired to respond. I got home and dumped everything she gave me onto the kitchen table. Food lists, meditation protocols, printed scientific articles, names of supplements I'd never heard of. I looked at that pile of paper and thought, where do I even begin? The answer came in the form of a simple and terrifying thought. You start by waking up differently tomorrow. I set my alarm for 5 in the morning. I don't remember the last time I woke up this early by choice. My whole life, I've woken up early out of obligation, to make breakfast for the children, to get to work before the boss. But never for myself, never to have a moment that was just mine. Before going to sleep, I looked out the bedroom window. The moon was almost full, hanging in the sky like a silent witness to all my failures and, perhaps, all my new beginnings. The alarm clock rang in the complete darkness of the following morning, and for the first time in 67 years, I didn't hit the snooze button. The first 3 months were the most brutal of my life, and mind you, I had already gone through childbirth, lost my husband, and worked 3 jobs at the same time. But this was different. It was as if my body was being disassembled and reassembled at the same time, and I wasn't sure if the pieces would ever fit back together. Chemotherapy was destroying me from the inside out. My hair started falling out in clumps in the shower, clogging the drain as physical proof of my fragility. I vomited until there was nothing left in my stomach, and then vomited bitter yellow bile. There were days when I could barely get out of bed to go to the bathroom. But every morning, even when every cell in my body begged to stay, in bed, I dragged this dying body out of the sheets at 5 in the morning. I sat on the cold living room floor, where I had set up a little corner with an old cushion and a candle that I never lit because I was afraid of forgetting and causing a fire. And I tried to meditate. The first few weeks were pathetic. I couldn't stay still for more than 30 seconds. My mind was a swarm of angry bees, worries about money, about upcoming exams, about the possibility of dying alone and being found days later by the neighbor complaining about the smell. But I went back every day, even when it seemed pointless, even when the voice in my head laughed at me and said it was nonsense for people with too much time on their hands. I started writing everything down in a notebook that stayed next to my pillow. Small observations about how I felt, about thoughts that appeared, about my body aching in new ways every day. And slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice, something began to change. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't instant healing. It was more subtle. I was beginning to perceive a tiny space between thought and reaction, between pain and the panic of pain. It was as if for the first time in my life, I was watching my own mind work, instead of being hijacked by it. Food was another battle. I had been raised on rice, beans, meat, and soda. Food was comfort. It was memory. It was the only thing that still connected me to my mother, who died 20 years ago. And suddenly, I was throwing it all away and learning to eat things I could barely pronounce. Kale, turmeric, quinoa, kombucha. Each bite was an act of faith or despair. I never knew for sure which was which. My children called amidst this chaos. The oldest asked how I was doing, but didn't wait for a real answer. He spoke quickly about his work, about his grandchildren growing up, about the bills that were piling up. He ended the call, telling me to take care of myself, as if it were a simple task, like changing a burnt-out light bulb. I hung up the phone and cried for the first time in weeks, not out of self-pity, out of anger. Anger at having raised people who didn't know how to see me, at having been so available that I became invisible, at having given so much that they never learned to give back. But then I dried my tears and went back to my routine, because this journey wasn't about them. Perhaps for the first time in my life, something was just about me. The 6th month arrived with the checkup. I sat in the same room, in the same office that smelled of fear disguised as detergent. The doctor came in with the folder and that neutral face that doctors learn to make in medical school. He opened the results and remained silent for far too long. My heart was beating so fast I was sure he could hear it. Then he looked up and said 2 words I never thought I'd hear. Answering well. 18 months after the diagnosis, the doctor used the word I was terrified to believe. Remission. Complete. He flipped through the tests as if searching for something he was sure was there, but simply couldn't find. The spots had disappeared. The markers were normal. He shook his head slowly and said it was rare, very rare, especially considering the stage I was at. He used the word miracle with that clinical tone of someone who doesn't believe in miracles but has no other explanation. I left that office and drove to an empty parking lot. I turned off the car and sat there for a whole hour, just breathing. I didn't cry with relief. I didn't celebrate. I felt something much stranger, a gigantic responsibility, as if the universe had given me back my life and now I needed to do something worthy of this gift. I couldn't simply go back to being who I was before. That woman was dead, and this new person, this survivor, needed to discover who she was and what she had been spared for. During the following months, while my body slowly recovered from the onslaught of chemotherapy, my mind wouldn't stop. I had notebooks and more notebooks filled with notes about everything I had learned, every supplement I had tried, every protocol I had followed, every discovery about my own body that no doctor had ever told me. I began to look around with different eyes. I saw people in supermarket lines buying colorful poison in pretty packaging. I saw friends my age complaining about illnesses as if they were inevitable sentences. I saw an entire system that treated symptoms but never asked why people were getting sick in the first place. And I felt something growing inside me, something dangerous and irresistible, indignation. Why hadn't anyone told me any of this before? Why had I spent 67 years poisoning my body thinking I was living? Why was real health information locked away in scientific articles that nobody read, or being sold by expensive gurus to rich people? I started writing. I didn't know exactly what. I just poured everything that was bubbling inside me onto the paper. Stories of how I had changed every aspect of my life, protocols he had created, mistakes he had made, small victories that nobody saw but that to me were worth more than any trophy. I wrote in the early hours of the morning, when the house was silent and the world was still asleep. I wrote until my hand ached, and the more I wrote, the clearer an idea that previously seemed absurd became. What if I transformed this into something bigger? What if other people needed to hear this? That's when I called my daughter. I chose her because she's always been the most practical of the three of us, the one who inherited my problem-solving skills. I told her my idea, to create a holistic wellness platform, accessible, real, without miraculous promises, but with real information. A place where people like me, forgotten by the system, could learn to heal themselves from the inside out. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she laughed. It wasn't a malicious laugh, but it was devastating nonetheless. Mom, you're almost 70 years old. You don't know anything about the internet, social media, business, and even if you did, who's going to listen to a lady talking about health? Each word was a stab in the back. But what hurt me most wasn't the laugh. It was the surprise in her voice, as if the idea that I could create something new was fundamentally impossible. As if my useful life had expired on my 50th birthday and now I was just taking up space. I hung up the phone and stared at the kitchen wall. There was a crack there that I had never noticed before. I grabbed a yellow Post-it note and wrote, 69 years old, 0 experience, no support. I stuck it on the refrigerator and stared at it for a long time, feeling the weight of each word settle into my bones. I spent 2 weeks staring at that Post-it note on the refrigerator. 2 weeks where my daughter's voice echoed in my head like a broken record. Who's going to listen to a lady? Who's going to listen to a lady? Who's going to listen to a lady? There were days when I agreed with her. I looked in the mirror and saw a 69-year-old woman with deep wrinkles around her eyes, hands stained by time, a body that had survived cancer but still carried the scars. What was I thinking? Starting a business? Me, who barely knew how to text on my cell phone without pressing the wrong button? But there were other days when I woke up at 5 in the morning with a sharp clarity. If not now, when? If not me, who? I started researching. I spent hours in the public library because internet at home was expensive and slow. I wrote everything down in notebooks: how to create a website, what social media was, how people sold knowledge online. Each new term was like learning a foreign language: algorithm, engagement, sales funnel, words that seemed from another planet. I watched YouTube videos of young people in their 20s teaching how to build digital businesses. They spoke fast, used slang I didn't understand, and made everything seem so easy. But I would go back, watch again, pause, take notes, and try to translate that world into something that made sense in my reality. It was around that time that I tried to present my idea to other people: a cousin who worked in marketing, 2 friends from my time as a secretary, a bank manager where I tried to get a small loan. The responses ranged from pity to condescension. How lovely that you have a new hobby. Maybe it would be better to enjoy your retirement and rest. You've suffered so much already. This type of business needs a large investment, experience, technical knowledge. The bank manager was the most direct. Madam, digital businesses are for young people. The wellness market is saturated, and with all due respect, your age doesn't inspire credibility in this segment. It does inspire credibility. Those words kept burning, as if having survived 70 years, raised 3 children, buried a husband, overcome terminal cancer, wasn't enough credibility. As if the wrinkles on my face were signs of incompetence and not medals of battles won. I left that bank with the loan denied and a rage in my chest that was starting to become familiar. It was fuel, pure gasoline for a fire that no one else could see, but that was consuming everything inside me. I arrived home and did something that terrified me. I opened my savings account, $47,000, everything I had managed to save in a lifetime of work. It was for emergencies, so I wouldn't be a burden to my children when I was too old to take care of myself, to have dignity in my final years. I stared at that number for hours. I calculated how long it would last if I simply continued living as I was. 5 years, maybe 6 if I was very careful. 6 years of safe, predictable, invisible existence. Or I could bet everything on something that would probably fail. On a crazy idea from an old woman that nobody took seriously. The chances of it going wrong were enormous. The chances of losing everything were real. But then I remembered something. I had already died once. I had already looked into the abyss and back. What else could scare me? Bankruptcy? Humiliation? I had already experienced invisibility, which was worse than any of those things. The next morning I woke up with a decision made. I went to the bank, withdrew $20,000, and felt my hand tremble as I signed the papers. The clerk asked if I was sure, looking at me with genuine concern, as if she were watching an old lady being scammed by some con artist, without realizing that the only person betting on me was myself. With those $20,000, I started building something from scratch. I hired a 23-year-old who charged $1,500 to make a basic website. He spoke to me slowly, as if I were deaf or stupid, explaining each button 3 times. I wrote everything down, smiled politely, and when he left, I cried with frustration because I hadn't understood half of what he said. I bought a better cell phone because mine didn't record decent video. I spent 2 weeks watching YouTube tutorials on how to use the camera, how to hold the device without shaking, how to speak looking at the lens instead of my own face on the screen. It seemed simple when others did it. When it was me, my voice came out shaky, my face stiff. I forgot what I was going to say mid-sentence. I recorded my first video 47 times before I had the courage to post it. It was me sitting in the kitchen with the horrible light from the ceiling casting strange shadows on my face, talking about how I had beaten cancer. My hand shook so much that the image came out blurry. I stuttered. I said about 20 times, but I posted it anyway, because if I waited for perfection, I'd never get anything done. Views in the first week, 42. Most were probably bots or accidental clicks. I posted another video, then another, then another. I wrote posts on social media every morning after meditating, before the sun had fully risen. I talked about food, about meditation, about how the body is more resilient than we've been taught. Each post seemed to disappear into the digital void. No one commented. No one shared. I was screaming in an endless desert, and only the echo of my own voice answered. I started waking up in the middle of the night with panic attacks. What if my daughter was right? What if I was wasting the last years of my life And the last money I had on a pathetic fantasy? There were days when I looked at my bank statement and saw the number decreasing. 19,000, 18, 17. Every penny spent on ads that no one clicked on tools I barely knew how to use, on online courses that promised to teach how to grow on social media. My children knew nothing about this. I had stopped telling them my plans after my daughter's laughter. Now our conversations were superficial, predictable. How's the weather there? How are the children? Are you taking care of yourself? Polite lies from both sides. 3 months had passed. I was in the red, emotionally and financially. I had 380 followers on social media, mostly fake profiles or people who never interacted. 0 sales, 0 impact, 0 evidence that anything I was doing made a difference to anyone. I sat on the kitchen floor on a Tuesday morning and seriously considered giving up, deleting everything, pretending none of it had happened, living the rest of my life with the money I had left and my dignity partially intact. I picked up my phone to delete my account. There was a notification, a message from someone I didn't know. I opened it expecting spam, some robot trying to sell me something. But it wasn't. It was a woman. She had written, "I watched your video about continuing even when nobody believes. I'm 54 years old and I've just been diagnosed. I'm terrified, but you made me feel like maybe I can do it. Thank you for existing." I read that message 7 times. My eyes filled with tears, and they weren't tears of sadness. I put my phone away, got up from the floor, and thought, one person. A single person was touched. And if one, then maybe 2, maybe 10, maybe 100 are out there needing to hear this, and I haven't reached them yet. That message changed something fundamental within me. It was no longer about proving anything to my daughter, to the bank manager, to the friends who treated me with pity. It was about that terrified 54-year-old woman somewhere I would never meet, and about all the others like her that I hadn't yet reached. I doubled my dedication. I woke up at 4:30 now because every minute mattered. I posted every single day without exception, even when I was exhausted, even when it seemed pointless. I taught myself how to edit videos on a free app that crashed every 5 minutes on my old phone. My arthritic fingers ached from typing so much, but I kept going. I started to be more vulnerable in the videos. I stopped trying to seem professional or polished. I talked about loneliness, about fear, about the days I wanted to give up. I talked while crying sometimes. I showed my face without makeup, my thin white hair, my trembling hands, and something strange began to happen. People started to respond, slowly at first, a comment here, another there. I feel the same way. Nobody talks about this. Thank you for being real. And then, 3.5 months after that first terrible video in the kitchen, one of my videos went viral. It wasn't what I thought it would be. It wasn't about scientific protocols or complex health strategies. It was a 2-minute video I recorded, crying after a sleepless night. I simply looked at the camera and said, "I've spent 67 years of my life being invisible, accepting crumbs of attention, convincing myself I didn't deserve more. Cancer didn't teach me to fight. It taught me that invisibility was always my choice." I posted it without reviewing, without properly editing, because I was too tired to care. I went to sleep. When I woke up, I had 200 notifications. I thought it was an app error, but it wasn't. The video had 2,000 views, then 10,000, then 50,000. The comments kept pouring in. Women my age, older, younger, all saying the same thing with different words. "You are me." I thought, only I felt this way. Thank you for making me feel less alone. In 48 hours, the video had 2 million views. My inbox exploded. Hundreds of stories of people who felt forgotten, invisible, too late. People who had given up on their dreams because someone said they were too old, not qualified enough, past their prime. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by notifications, and understood something profound. I hadn't built an audience. I had found a tribe, forgotten people finding other forgotten people. And suddenly we weren't alone anymore. But viral success doesn't pay the bills. And I was still bleeding money. I had $4,000 in my account and no idea how to turn attention into a livelihood. I spent 3 days frantically researching. How did people monetize? What could I offer that had real value? I didn't want to sell illusions or empty promises. I wanted to give something genuine. I created an online course, basic, simple, using all the free tools I could find. I called it Rebirth After 50, Real Protocols to Rebuild Your Body and Your Life. I charged $47, the same amount I had per month when I started. I posted about the course without great expectations. I thought maybe 10 people would buy it, maybe 15 if I was lucky. In 24 hours, 380 people signed up. I looked at the number on the computer screen, unable to process it. It was almost $18,000 in one day, doing something she loved, helping people in need. I called my daughter for the first time in months, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. But when she answered and started talking about her routine without even asking how I was, I realized I had something more important to do than seek validation from someone who never knew how to see me. I hung up the phone with my daughter and went back to the computer. I had work to do. People waiting. For the next 8 months, I barely slept. It wasn't a morbid obsession. It was purpose finally found. I launched more courses. I created online support communities where people shared their journeys. I developed specific wellness protocols for those starting late, for bodies that had been ignored for decades, for people the wellness industry had forgotten because they weren't young, thin, or rich enough. I worked 16 hours a day. I answered messages at 3 in the morning. I recorded videos in the bathroom when it was the only quiet place. My body complained. My joints ached. There were nights when I collapsed into bed with my phone still in my hand, waking up hours later with the screen lit up my face. My children finally started paying attention, not because they asked about my life, but because someone mentioned they'd seen their mother online. My middle son called me, his voice oscillating between surprise and something that sounded like pride. "Mom, you're famous." Famous. The word sounded strange. I didn't feel famous. I felt like I was finally accomplishing something I should have always done, but I didn't say that. I just thanked her and changed the subject. The first million arrived on a rainy October day. I looked at my bank statement and didn't feel what I expected. There was no euphoria. There was no sense of victory, because the money was never the point. The point was the messages that kept coming. You saved my marriage because you taught me to save myself first. I started meditating because of you. And for the first time in 20 years, I'm not taking sleeping pills. I'm 62 years old and I've gone back to school. I thought it was too late until I met you. These words were worth more than any number in the bank account, but the money allowed something important: growth. I hired 2 people to help me, then 5, then 15, older women mostly, people who had been invisible in their previous jobs and were now flourishing by helping others become visible. In 14 months, my small operation from a rented room became a real company, a real office, a real team. Revenue that made the bank manager who had denied me the loan call asking to schedule a meeting. I politely declined. Some doors, once closed, need to stay closed. Magazines started asking for interviews. They wanted the story of the woman who beat cancer and built an empire. I refused most, not because I was modest, but because every hour I spent talking about myself was an hour I wasn't serving my community, and they still needed me. There was a 73-year-old woman who texted me every Monday morning, "I'm still here. I'm still trying." There was a 68-year-old man who had lost his wife and was relearning to live alone. There were hundreds, thousands of people whose only genuine connection was that community I had created from scratch. I couldn't abandon them for ego or fame, but success comes at a price, and mine was starting to show in ways I didn't expect. Loneliness grew proportionally to the empire. The more people I helped, the more alone I felt. My children now called every week. But the conversations had changed. They asked about the business, about numbers, about whether I was doing estate planning. Estate planning. As if I were already dead and they were dividing the spoils. They never asked if I was happy, if I slept well, if I still meditated every morning like I always did. One night, after a particularly long meeting, I sat alone in the empty office looking at the trophies on the wall, the plaques of recognition, the photos from events where I smiled for cameras alongside people I barely knew, and the question pierced my chest like a thorn. I saved thousands of people from invisibility, but remained invisible to those who mattered most. The letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. It was in the middle of a pile of business mail, bills, contracts. I almost threw it away without opening it because the envelope was plain, with no return address. handwritten in shaky handwriting. Something made me stop. I opened it slowly and read. It was from a woman named Sarah, 34 years old. She had just been diagnosed with the same cancer that almost killed me 6 years ago. She wrote, "I found your videos at 3 a.m. when I was on the bathroom floor having a panic attack. I thought my life was over, that everything I had built, everything I had dreamed of, had been stolen from me at 34. But you were there on my phone screen, saying that you started at 67. That invisibility is a choice. That rebirth has no expiration date. I don't know if I'll survive. The doctors aren't optimistic, but I know that if I survive, I'll truly live this time, because you taught me that starting over doesn't need permission. Thank you for existing when I needed you most." I sat on the floor of my large, modern office, with its beautiful view and expensive furniture, and cried like I hadn't cried since. The day of my diagnosis, not from sadness, from something bigger that I couldn't name. Understanding, perhaps, or acceptance. I spent the following weeks thinking about that letter, about Sarah and all the other Sarahs I would never know, about how my pain had become a bridge to other people's pain, about how the worst moment of my life had generated the best. I began to reassess everything, the empire I built, the people I employed, the millions I made. None of it meant what I thought it meant. It wasn't about business success. It was about something infinitely simpler and more complex: human connection. I had spent 67 years disconnected from myself, and the last 6 years reconnecting thousands of people with themselves. The legacy wasn't in the numbers. It was in the lives that would continue to change long after I was no longer here. I arranged a dinner with my 3 children. I didn't say why. I just asked them to come. They showed up curious, perhaps worried. We sat in a simple restaurant, the kind of place I used to frequent before I had money. I looked at their faces, older now, marked by the very battles I had never really asked about. And he said something he'd needed to say for years. "I love you, but I built my life hoping you would see me, and that was unfair. To you and to me." There was an awkward silence. My daughter, the one who had laughed at my idea, cleared her throat. "Mom, I raised my hand. "You don't need to say anything. I just need you to know that I'm at peace, finally. Not because you've changed, but because I've changed." I went home alone that night, but the solitude tasted different. It wasn't abandonment anymore. It was a choice, freedom. In the following months, something began to happen. My children started calling not to talk about business, but to ask real questions, small ones at first. How do you manage to wake up motivated every day? Are you still afraid? How did you decide it was worth trying? Short, hesitant, but real conversations. I don't know if it was genuine pride or if they had finally understood that they almost lost me and wasted the chance to get to know me. Maybe I'll never know. And I learned that it's okay not to know. Some questions don't need answers. Some wounds don't need to heal completely. Today, I am 73 years old. My body is tired in new ways. I wake up with aches and pains I didn't have before. I sometimes forget words mid-sentence, but my soul, for the first time in 7 decades, is whole. I look out the office window every morning before sunrise while the world is still asleep, and I think of Sarah and the thousands like her who are waking up somewhere now, scared, lost, thinking it's too late, and I whisper to the universe, it's not too late. It was never too late, and if I managed it at 67, imagine what you can do. There's a question I always get asked. When did you know it was going to work out? The truth is, I never knew. Not the day the eyes. First video went viral. Not the day I made my first million. Not now, with a company that employs 47 people and touches the lives of thousands every day. Because success was never about numbers. It was about waking up every morning and choosing again not to disappear. And that choice has no expiration date. Yesterday I received a message from an 81-year-old woman. She wrote that she was learning to use a computer for the first time because she wanted to be part of the community. 81 years old and still starting out, still choosing visibility, still refusing to accept that the game is over. I read that message and smiled because I understood something fundamental. I didn't build a wellness empire. I built a legacy of sacred stubbornness, of people who refused to die before their time. And time, I discovered, isn't measured in years. It's measured in how many times you're willing to start over. Some people die at 30 because they stop starting. Some people are alive at 90 because they never stop. Sometimes I look back and try to pinpoint the exact moment when everything changed. Was it in the doctor's office when I received the diagnosis? Was it in the kitchen when I decided I was going to die alive? Was it at the cafe with that radiant woman? Was it when I spent my savings? Was it when I posted that video crying? The truth is, it wasn't any of those moments, and it was all of them. Change isn't an event. It's accumulation. 1,000 small, invisible choices that one day become a completely different person. 1,000 mornings waking up when my body begged me to keep sleeping. 1,000 times saying yes to myself when the whole world said no. 1,000 moments of pure terror pushed aside because on the other side of fear was something I needed more than security: purpose. My children asked me the other day what I'm going to do when I decide to stop. I looked at them, not understanding the question. Stop what? Living? Because this isn't work. It's breathing. It's the reason I wake up. It's the answer to the question I've spent 67 years avoiding. Why am I here? I don't know how much time I have left. The cancer has been in remission for 6 years, but I know that doesn't mean forever. My body is getting old. Parts are breaking down. There are bad days, days when exhaustion weighs like lead, and I wonder if I'm killing myself with work. But then I remember, I've already died once. This is extra. Life. Every second is profit. Every person touched is a dividend. Every message from someone saying they started over because of me is proof that it was worth staying, fighting, choosing visibility when invisibility was so much easier. So no, I'm not going to stop. I'll continue until my body truly gives up. And when that happens, I know the legacy won't die with me, because I didn't build something that depends on my existence. I built a movement, a collective permission to start over. And permissions once given cannot be taken back. Last night, before going to sleep, I opened my old notebook, the one I wrote in the night of my diagnosis, full of dreams I thought were impossible. I read the whole list. I crossed off some items I'd already accomplished. And then, on the last blank page, I started a new list. Because there's always a new list. There's always a next rebirth. There's always something I haven't tried, haven't lived, haven't dared to dream. 73 years old, and still writing dream lists like a teenager. Some people would say it's sad that I should accept my age and rest. But those people never understood. Resting is for the dead. And I, finally, am alive. I closed my notebook and stared out the bedroom window. The moon was almost full again, just like that night 6 years ago when I set my alarm for 5 in the morning for the first time. How many moons had passed since then? How many dawns had I woken up in the dark, choosing to keep going? I lost count, but each one mattered. I got up and went to the kitchen. The yellow post-it note was still there on the refrigerator, faded by time. 69 years old, 0 experience, no support. I never took it off. I kept it as a reminder of what's possible when you stop waiting for permission. Next to it, I stuck another one today. 73 years old, empire built, thousands of lives touched, not finished yet. Because that's the truth, nobody tells you. You never finish. There's no finish. Line where you can finally relax and say it's over. I did it. I can stop now. Life doesn't work that way. You just keep starting until you can't anymore. And even then, if you did it right, other people pick up where you left off and continue. That's legacy. Not what you accumulate, but what you spread. I received an email this morning. It was from Sarah, that 34-year-old woman who wrote me the letter. She's in remission. 10 months of brutal struggle, but she's alive and starting over. She wrote that she's launching her own project, something about helping young women with cancer not lose their identity during treatment. She said I inspired her, but the truth is the opposite. She reminds me why all this matters. Why every video recorded at 3 in the morning, every message answered when I could barely keep my eyes open, every penny risked, every humiliation swallowed, was worth it. Not because I built something grand, but because I helped one person build something grand within themselves, and she will help another, and that other will help 10 more, and those 10 will touch hundreds. That's how the world changes, not by heroic gestures of extraordinary people, but by ordinary people refusing to accept that it's too late. My grandchildren came to visit me last week. For the first time, they asked me about the business, not because their parents told them to, but because they were genuinely curious. The oldest, 14 years old, asked, "Grandma, are you afraid of failing?" I looked at her and told her the truth. Every day, but I'm more afraid of not trying. I saw something change in her face at that moment, a seed being planted, and I thought, maybe that's the real legacy. Not the company, not the money, not the numbers, but showing a 14-year-old girl that fear is no reason to stop, that age is no excuse, that starting over is a verb you can conjugate until your last breath. This morning, meditating in the same corner of the room where I began, this journey, I felt something different. It wasn't peace exactly. It was more like completeness, not in the sense of being ready to end, but in the sense of finally being whole. All the parts of me that I spent decades hiding, denying, suffocating, finally integrated into a person I recognize and, for the first time, respect. There's a phrase I repeat to myself every morning now, my own version of a prayer. I didn't waste today. It doesn't matter what happens, whether I made money or lost. Whether I helped 1,000 people or just one, whether the numbers went up or down. The only metric that matters is, did I show up? Did I try? Did I choose visibility over comfort? If so, I didn't waste it. I look at the horizon through the window and see the sun beginning to rise. Another day, another chance, another opportunity to prove that it doesn't matter when you start. What matters is that you never stop starting. My body is tired in ways I can no longer ignore. I know the clock is ticking. We all know, deep down, that time is finite. But I finally understood that it's not about how much time you have. It's about what you do with the time you have left. And I chose to make noise. I chose to disturb. I chose to be impossible to ignore after being invisible for so long. If I'm going to die, and I will, because we all will, I want to die knowing that I lived so loudly that the echo will continue long after I'm silent. I keep Sarah's letter in the drawer next to hundreds of others. Each one is a life. Each one is proof that none of this was fantasy. It was real. It is real. It will be real long after I'm gone. And if you're reading this, listening to this, experiencing this, and thinking it's too late for you, let me tell you a secret I learned at 67 years old on the floor of a doctor's office. Too late is a lie they told you to keep you quiet, and you don't have to believe it anymore. If this story touched you in any way, if something inside you has awakened now, hit that like button. Not for me, for you. Because this simple gesture is your first choice for visibility today. It's you saying, I exist, I matter, and I refuse to disappear. And subscribe to the channel, because every week I bring you stories of people who started over when everyone said it was too late. Stories that prove the game only ends when you decide to stop playing. Now tell me in the comments, how old are you and what are you going to start today? Not tomorrow. Today. I want to transform this comment section into a manifesto of new beginnings. Let's prove together that age is just a number and that too late is a lie they told us to keep us quiet. See you in the next video. And remember, you didn't waste today if you chose to show up.